welcome to a series that I'd like to call The Professional Insider, a weekly podcast where I talk to people in particular and perhaps peculiar professions, getting a glimpse into their work and into their lives. I'm your host, Hellion Toys. Today's profession concerns toys and toy makers. Whether we realise it or not, toys are an important part of our development as a child. They engage our senses, spark our imaginations, and they help to encourage children to interact with other children. But as an industry, how much is known to the public? Today I'm speaking to Dr Selina Ellis-Gray, otherwise known as Dr Hellion, the Toymaker behind Hellion Toys. So, Selina, can you tell me a bit about your background, how you got into toy making? Was it something that you wanted to do from when you were a child, or did you study?
So this is a bit of a winding path. So I haven't had a straight route. It's not been that I left school and I did some kind of toy making qualification. And I think, like a lot of toy makers, we've been on a bit of a journey. I think mine really stems from having an uncomfortable time at school, being a dyslexic, and that sort of put me out of school thinking about education slightly differently, because I've not really done particularly well in that sort of traditional educational route. And I went on to do childcare initially, and it was in that I actually encountered, it was a book in the library, a Maria Montessori book. It was a biographical novel that someone had written about her life, and reading that just radically changed the way that I actually thought about a lot of these educational systems and how they're currently set up, because she just had a different radical perspective on how to think about learning, how we can think about children and childhood. And at the time, I found that pretty inspirational, but I also found it quite liberating, because it made me think that for me as a person, although I might have struggled in a traditional academic route, that there were things that I could bring to the table that were just as valuable. And that's eventually what I did. I went back to college to study, and my talents and sort of art and design sort of became liberated, I guess, in an art and design department. And I did a very vocational based training, so like graphic design, and moved forward with that. And I did work freelance for some time, but I had a hunger and lots of questions around this sort of blend between how we design for learning, like how do we make objects that are playful, that help children sort of gain some footing on what their skills are, on what perspective they bring to the table, and value them all. And that eventually led to doing a master's degree. And then I did a PhD, so I did some certificate collecting. But I always knew that I think that interest was going to lead into doing something that's practical, and it did. It born out to the Hellion Toys. That's the brand name. I operate under that as Dr Hellion, which is, obviously part of the PhD, and at its root is these continual interests and questions around learning. Producing stuff for the early years, I think, comes from a perspective about being more holistic about what learning is and what counts.
To bring up sort of 2 points that you sort of mentioned there, firstly, tackling education, I guess. Education and creativity, it's often a subject that maybe isn't discussed as much, and how the attention of the education system doesn't really focus on the creative side and the creative arts, and therefore people within that industry may not feel like there's many options for them. There's a lot of focusing on maths and science, and I remember that we spoke before about Sir Ken Robinson and his talks about education and creativity. I just wanted to get your stance from it, really, and what your experience, does it correlate with that? Does it highlight that for you in your experiences in education?
Yeah, I mean, I have a personal perspective of what it was like to be in a system as someone who is not necessarily able to meet a very mainstream academic track very easily. So when it came to subjects like maths and English and science, things that we would understand as being very traditionally academic, that's not where my talents lay. Mine lay in a different space. And I think that then prompts that perspective, doesn't it, about thinking about all the different things that people bring to the table. So I think my interest comes from being able to recognise that people have a set of holistic things that they come to the table with, and that if we only value some of them, that actually we're doing a disservice to the others. And some of these skills there might be skills that aren't immediately recognisable because, maths and English and science are so structurally recognised in terms of how they function. But you've got things like creativity, like you say, critical thinking skills, problem solving, quite innovative thinking. It's a different set of things people bring. And I think sometimes people like Montessori were actually already doing this like 100 years ago, where they were pointing out that all these things matter and we have to pay attention to all of them. And for me, the interesting aspect of being as a toy maker is that starts young, because if we can have objects that enable children to explore where their interests lie and support them and don't almost designly structure them to be a particular way, it sort of enables them to sort of become more in tune with themselves. I often wonder as well, in terms of parents, whether or not they get to observe their children and what their interests are and see how open-ended objects tell them something about their own children as well. So I don't know if that moves slightly on a tangent, but I think education is just potentially nothing wrong with it in any way, but not always embracing of the differences that the different skill sets that people bring to the table. We have maybe sometimes overlooked, like I said, some of those, maybe you could even call them softer skills, but things like problem solving, we right now could do with some really good problem solvers. Do you not agree?
Yeah, no, definitely.
People who think differently are a bit more innovative, maybe, what would the word be? People who sort of, connect up dots that are always linear, non-linear thinkers. Maybe even risk takers, people who are quite happy to sort of step out of the status quo and embrace that kind of creative thinking. So it's not always about just practical art and design. It can just be about a mindset, can't it? And embracing that, what it brings to the table.
Not all the greatest sort of thinkers that we've had and that we know in our history books didn't get into said books by thinking like everyone else. They pushed the boundaries, they took risks, they thought outside the box, didn't they?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that we have to think differently, because is it Einstein that said that something about if you keep trying to fix a problem, something about insanity. Sorry, this quote is really coming at me very badly.
Oh, yeah, so if you keep on doing something over and over again and expecting a different result, then
exactly.
it's the definition of insanity. Yeah, I know what quote you mean. I don't know who said it, though.
I think it's Einstein, but I may be wrong. But there's something in that about, if we're facing, particularly at the moment, right, such radical social change in a way, we're facing environmental issues that just are looming. And it kind of asked us to think slightly out of the box.
To go back on your point earlier about Dr. Hellion and that sort of persona, I remember you telling me in a sort of conversation before that it was often understood by maybe some of your customers, or mistaken by some of your customers actually, that it was like your husband that was actually the work behind the toy making, just because of the name. Is playing with gender something that you are interested in? Was that the intention when you came up with the name?
I think so. I mean, I am quite playful. One of the things that we have as a tagline on Hellion is this whole idea about being an official troublemaker or mischief maker. I think there is something in, not just in something that's put within objects, having playful objects. I think it's about just having a bit of a playful character, a little bit mischievous in the sense that want to cause a bit of good trouble. That is definitely part of what's going on there. And Dr. Hellion is about sort of that alter ego. It troubles those waters. I think having a doctorate and having that title like Dr. Ellis-Gray, which sometimes can make an assumption that that's a man or a male persona. I kind of like the fact that gets disturbed. And yeah, the conversation we had was about how I'd been with my husband at a social event and someone was asking me what I did, and the assumption was that he made the toys and I painted them. There was sort of this sense that there was some kind of female practice to toy making that I could do. He would do the male bit, which would be, and it's extremely gendered. I think that's part of toys, the responsibility maybe of toys at the moment, actually. There is an organisation called Let Toys Be Toys, and we were awarded the Good Practice Award this year. And some of the work that they're doing is really interesting to sort of like track into. I think you'd probably appreciate having a nose at it. But some of it is thinking around diversity and thinking about gendered approaches to design and the problems that actually ends up causing. I mean, the whole thing about stereotyping girls and boys and not thinking about gender as something that is as diverse as it is, and thinking about diversity and representation is a big issue in the toy making field. I think a lot of toy manufacturers are being asked to, do things differently, think about including different, names and languages and different motifs around things, and just generally trying to break out some of the binaries that have been placed upon children, really, because that's what's happening, isn't it? If we have a toy that's designed, that's very gendered, it sort of immediately presents them with something that they have to embrace, I guess.
Do you think then that sort of very restrictive binary system is one of the main problems within the toy industry, or do you think there are more?
I think the sustainable practice of making toys is a big topic of conversation at the moment around plastic bags and plastic bottles. There's got to be a conversation there about plastic toys and how sustainable they are in terms of the manufacture of them. The raw resources that it's taken to pull those together, the materials of them. What is that doing on an ecological level? I think that's a conversation that also comes into the actual design, not only the materials, but the way that toys are designed to have what I class as a high turnover. So toys are designed for a very short window, maybe 0 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months. Design there is not necessarily thinking in terms of longevity and sustainability and producing toys that are long-term toys that a baby can play with right up to, that essentially slipping into a box and becoming an heirloom for the next generation, where a toy no longer seems to have the pull it used to do, rather than a toy maybe having 6 months, it could have 6 or 7 years and then be safely stored away because it's produced from materials that last. I think that is a huge issue that needs discussing. I know the last time we spoke, we talked about how McDonald's is one of the biggest toy distributors in the world, and how many of those toys have been found in research projects. So the study of the Thames, where they did some exploring of the riverbeds, the things that we're finding, there's hundreds of McDonald's toys. So, there's a conversation about the plastics and the sustainability. And yes, representation is right now such a key moment that we just, have to take what is being fed around culturally and take it seriously, that we can no longer just sort of slide through the fact that the representation of toys are just too white. And that there isn't enough diversity and representation there, because I don't think long-term pictures around very binary, non-representational toys what we need. It's just not needed to have these kind of elements being put out there. That we need things that are going to last and be sustainable and representational of difference and embracing of different cultures. And
Thank you for that, by the way. To talk about like mass manufacturing and things, almost that the way that these larger companies and larger sort of toy makers, I guess, mass manufacture toys that often are very uniform, might not use the safest chemicals when making and creating these toys. How do, I guess, more bespoke and eco-friendly toy makers such as yourself compete against these mass manufacturers? Because obviously the competition must be quite intense. So how, from your perspective, how are you gonna win that fight almost?
Yeah, I mean, it's good if you want to position it in terms of that way, that there's them and there's us. And I think that is definitely one way of perceiving that. But I think there's another one there, which is people who are doing things differently, are quite authentic in what they're doing, are bringing something different to the table. And I think that's just becoming part of that change-making process of where stuff happens, change is slow. But if we stay at it, things do occur. And I think there is easy to sort of think about me versus, say, Fisher-Price. But that's not realistic.
No.
I mean, I am absolutely nowhere near that level of scale of, I can't even begin to think about how many millions of units they probably produce a year, which is just not something that I ever would do either. Because, the stuff that I make is totally different in how it's approached. But I don't think we're at loggerheads in that way. I just think there's a sea change probably coming, and conversations that need to be happening, which will probably end up shaping the mindset of how we're doing this stuff anyway, so that we don't need to necessarily be in competition with one another. I think we just need to maybe think about how we collectively start to work together in a way to change the way that things currently are, because the circumstances we're in are just, I think, too delicate, ecologically, not to be pulling together and being collaborative on some of these things. So yeah, but on a day-to-day basis, on a business level, it's impossible to keep up with businesses like that. And I think there is a small business movement that you probably will encounter on your travels, which is talking about the impact that small businesses make on the local economy, the positive impact that they make on the local economy in terms of hiring local and, sort of being in networks of local businesses and supporting them. And I do think hopefully that is part of that conversation as well, as where it's not just about me as a toymaker, but maybe being a small independent business trying to support other small independent businesses for the common good. The difficulty we have is we can't sort of track into a lot of elements that consumers do like, which is things being produced next day and being at the doorstep by 9 a.m. the following morning and things like that. So it's talking about something that I don't think I personally want to compete with anyway, but are actually impossible for us to meet. So maybe we're not even on the same playing field, if you understand me.
But surely the authenticity and the longevity of what you're offering, surely those are the main benefits of being in your position, aren't they? Or would you say that there are other main takeaways from being a toymaker such as yourself?
No, I would say so, yeah. I think people come to me because it may cost more in terms of time than money, but what they get at that is a quality toy that lasts generations. I think there's a totally different approach to it. I don't think that's what I'm saying about it not necessarily being a level playing field, because I think people are coming to me for a specific thing. I think there's a recognition there that I'm going to buy this and it's going to last. It's a very considered kind of purchase, and I think it's slightly different because my stuff's not at the end of the supermarket aisle. And I think that makes a different mindset to it. Understand me? It's a lot more engaged with where you're based locally and what it is that people are making and why that has strong values, I guess. I don't doubt that bigger companies have their own values, but they have, I think, different drivers behind their business than something like mine, because mine is very much attached to thinking about things being sustainable and eco, and actually quite design-led. I think I'm incredibly design-led. When I look at my work, I look at the body of it and I can see that there is something going on there which is about producing really sort of innovative, in a sense, craft design. It's totally different than I think than producing just mass manufactured toys.
Do you think that the way that locally sourced toys, ones that are made, sourced in Britain, is something that consumers, I mean the ones that are reaching out to you as well as consumers that approach this type of bespoke toy market anyway, do you think that trend is increasing, especially with the fact that there's a lot of thoughts that are growing now about Britain, British food, British homegrown, this and that. Do you think that has had an impact in how consumers approach even toys now, or do you think that that's always been the case?
my perspective of it is it has grown. Yes, there is more interest. I think it's this thing about when you become visible and you pop up as well, I think it raises possibilities people haven't thought of. It's almost like, oh, there's a Toymaker down the road. I think that just is kind of a bit of a thing, right? Toys just don't suddenly land in a box in your wherever. You can actually have a connection to someone who makes them. So I think there is that impact that it has within sort of your local community, for sure. And I think the tradition of toy making and traditionally made toys always stands well, so there's always an interest in it. But I do think it has grown mainly because of the sustainability issues, is that people are looking to try and source things that are ethically and sustainably manufactured. And you are right, there is no doubt that British manufacturing is of such an excellent quality that there's no doubt that leaning into businesses that offer that just provide overall benefits, because you're going to know that what your child's playing with is, not having any kind of negative impact. And I'm not saying that toys don't have, an end date. They do. Children eventually put them in a toy box and put them away. Just knowing that they don't then need to go to your local recycling plant or, move, along that kind of second-hand routes maybe until they break. Because that's the other thing that we have to sort of really address on this is when toys are being mass manufactured, they are designed to actually not last. All items have what they class as a shelf life, so they're designed to specifically not last past a certain point. There is a product usage sort of end date on them, and you hear it discussed about things like washing machines and other sort of household white goods that, as long as it lasts 3 years. I think that, toys are like that too. It's called planned obsolescence, so I'm just very quickly looking on Wikipedia, so you may want to sort of find a good source for this, but it's talking about shortening the replacement cycle. So the idea about it is it's a product production strategy that they know that the toy or whatever the item is going to be deliberately unfashionable or no longer functional after a certain period of time. That's totally the opposite end of what I'm looking at doing. And I think there's a recognition of that. I have had people reach out and say, can you make me such and such a thing? I've bought one before, but it's broken. So I think there is that sense there about, being aware that that's in the nature of some items that you purchase, right?
I mean, we spoke about it a little bit, I guess, at the beginning of the phone call, but I wanted to sort of, not just since our last interview, but I guess on the whole, and it's really a changing situation, isn't it, this pandemic, and how it's affecting different businesses. A lot of the creative industries that I've reached out to so far, they've sort of said they've almost been left to their own devices, almost left behind, really. A lot of people have tried to order things online, for example, especially when they want to get goods and consumer products, right? So a lot of online ordering and things like that is what's becoming the norm for them now, and therefore creative people that are more, have their businesses that are more in person and face to face have been affected by that. I just wanted to know from you, obviously from your toy making website, I can see that you obviously have links and that people can reach out to you online, but in terms of the process, your usual day-to-day working and toy making, how's the pandemic affected you?
Interestingly, from my perspective, very little. In that, in terms of my productivity, my manufacturing, very little. And that is because I live so rurally anyway, that there's always sort of never been that I've had a shop attached to what I'm doing, because it's not the footfall, or I've always sort of lived in a more of a rural lifestyle, so that, I'm kind of used to not having that footfall or relying on things like craft shows or things like that. So my work's always predominantly been sold online. The local craft fair to me, I think, that is sort of always come up on my radar is Skipton. I think that's about 20 miles away from where I'm at. It's not down the road. So, you can't rely on those things as you're building a business. So I've always built my business online, and my production and my manufacturing, small batch manufacturing is what I do, hasn't changed for that. I struggled to get all the materials, but on a day-to-day basis, I literally just kept going. I just had the problems that a lot of people did, which is finding the balance about working from a home perspective, because I've got a little boy, and how to manage that time. So obviously there's a childcare issues that arose. But in terms of financial impact, yeah, I do think there's been a huge impact there on the creative industries. There's no doubt about that, because a lot of people who are reliant on those kind of craft fairs and independent stores and stuff have really, really struggled. I think I'm just a bit unique in that, and that is literally because of where I live, I think. It was interesting at the time when it started, though, in the discussions that I were having within my networks of other independent businesses, about how much people were struggling to access financial support just to keep going. You know, be it that they had staff, that they had wages to pay and things like that, quite pragmatic stuff. Right down to sort of how their business plans and what were they going to look like for the next few months. But yeah, from my perspective, I've been quite fortunate in that I've just kept going as much as I possibly have been able to within the constraints that have been presented to all of us relatively. I do not think that speaks about a different kind of business model in a way, one that's predominantly online, one that in this environment is actually managed to stay quite stable. I think it does. I think, like you say, it's a lot of online businesses, people who sell predominantly through different internet platforms. Like I don't sell through, like, not on the high street as well as my website. I've actually done okay in that respect.
Do you think that maybe that would be an aspect of if you had the power to, and you had the opportunity to change aspects of the toy making industry, particularly in Britain, in the UK, would the financial aspect be something that you'd be wanting to change, or is, as you said, the diversity before, would that be like a key point for you to change about how the industry is as of now?
Oh, so what would I like to change about the toy making industry if I could?
Yeah, essentially, yeah, because you've brought up some very good points about things that are obviously quite difficult for toy makers right now. I wonder if those are the reasons, or those are the aspects you would change, or is there something else that's been a long-standing issue that you'd like to see be different?
I find this a difficult question, because I actually think that a lot of independent toy makers at the moment are all busy doing really awesome work. I think the toy industry is a bit different than toy makers, if you get what I mean. And I think, like, I'd like to see more support for, like, what I would class as heritage craft. That's one thing, if I could change, I would. I think there's a lot of craft people who are incredibly skilled, like Toymakers. There's lots of others. If you go to the Heritage Craft Association and have a look, you'll find all kinds of amazing people doing awesome work. Many of those skills, sadly, don't get the level of support they need to ensure they're being passed along and supported. I'd love to see more of that. I really would. There's a conversation that happened recently. I'm part of the British Toymakers Guild, where someone was trying to source a particular type of doll, and the maker who made them, I can't quite remember exact details, but no longer could. I think it was to do with the fact that they'd retired, and there wasn't another maker in Britain who could make that toy. And that's the kind of sort of levels of skills that we're losing. And I find that really, really sad, actually. And I think that speaks about supporting small independents more broadly, doesn't it? Because what you're saying there is, we must almost make a commitment to sort of the skills that we've got. It's been a hot topic this week, has it not? Boris Johnson has been talking about the sort of skills that are, he thinks, are delineated between vocational and non-vocational and things like that, and getting people into A-level college courses and things. There's actually people out there with skills that don't necessarily have access to be able to bring apprentices in and that. I think as easily as maybe there is starting to change that, actually, because again, I have heard that there is more being moved towards apprenticeship schemes, but I just think supporting independence and those skills that they've got and thrive in those industries, especially now, there's things that are made seem to be something that are increasingly in demand. I'd like to see more push in that direction for sure.
So, Selina, I'd love for you to tell me as well. I guess each day isn't really the same for you, but if you could sort of, I'd love to get to know what a typical day may look like. Is it a lot of online work, taking a lot of orders? I'd love to know about the toy making process as well, if there's like an average time that a toy making process takes, or is it very different depending on the toy, for example?
Yeah, right. So my day starts really early. Yesterday I think I was awake at 5. I think this morning was about 5:30, and my days are like that because I have a small person at home. We have quite a complex family. I think a lot of people have complex families, but and that means that I have to be very mindful about my working hours and how they're actually structured. So I tend to get up very early and I tend to work later in the evening to get work done. And I think that means that my work's very flexible, so you'll not see a traditional sort of I start at 9, I finish at 5 approach to what I do. I really like that flexibility. I think it works brilliantly. Especially it's very real for me at the moment in a pandemic with the kind of changes we face. I think it helped me quite a bit to be like that. In terms of day, then it depends what day of the week it is, really. At the beginning of the week, there's a lot of making, and at the end of the week, there's a lot of packing and posting that gets done and stuff being sent out. I spend the majority of my time, though, knee-deep in sawdust. I have this kind of blend between very traditional tools, like a lathe, and I have some more modern making tools like a CNC machine. I kind of like live in this hybrid, but my work in terms of on a day-to-day basis is quite simple, like cutting shapes and producing the toys. And then middle of the week, there's a heck of a lot of detail work. So like as I'm talking to you right now, I'm painting. I paint a lot of my toys up. So there's some little houses and things like that are all hand painted. And then they dry, and then at the end of the week, they'll get posted out. So that's quite a normal routine for me, actually. I tend to do that at least 5 days a week. I sometimes work 6 to try and get through the workload that I have. Because obviously I'm working so flexible, sometimes I have to take downtime off my little boy and then come back to it. And that means I end up having to run over. But yeah, it's a passion rather than just a job. It's not just about turning up outside to get through some stuff. It's about, really genuinely loving what you're doing. Because you've got to work at it like this, I think. Because it demands you to be passionate for it. Do you understand me? I don't clock in and I don't clock out, if you get what I'm saying. I actually dream about toys. Can you believe that?
Really?
Yeah, right? I've woke up sometimes and I've been like, I've got a brilliant idea. I need to get out to the workshop. And I've dreamt up ideas of things that I'd like to make. Or sometimes I'll be working on something and it won't be quite right. And I'll kind of have these moments where I'm in bed early in the morning and I'm like send me away, and I go, I've just cracked it, I know what I need to do, and then I fling myself out of bed in the morning. It's just totally different than sort of getting up and getting dressed and going to work. It's a very creative, problem solving kind of lifestyle, I think.
I don't think everybody could say that they dream about their work and sort of come up with brand new ideas mid-sleep, can they?
Yeah. I just absolutely love what I do. There's not a bit about what I do that I do not love. Like, I am so privileged to be able to do it. Like, there's nothing else in the world that I think I'm best suited for, and I love the fact that I get to do this, and that's why I kind of love the customers that I have, and I love the fact that they keep coming back to me, because it enables me to do something that I think I've got a talent for, and I feel like we have a really good exchange with each other. They're like patrons, so like come along and they buy things, and I send stuff out, and they love what they get, and I love what I do, and I think we have a brilliant exchange with each other. And I think just long may it continue that I have this capacity to do this kind of work, and I hope it's something that my little boy will be interested in. I don't know if he's as interested in it as I am. Who knows? He's still very young, but it'd be a family business, right?
That would be lovely.
He probably won't want to do it now, I said that, but...
Well, that was going to be another sort of follow-up question of mine. Does your son get any sort of toys that are made specifically by you, or does he have a few selected ones that are from a McDonald's toy, for example?
My little boy's quite interesting. I think his genetics ring through in that he's a maker, I think, at heart. So he plays with So if they got a train set out, for example, we have like a few toys like this, like construction sets. A train set's one of them. He's interested in building the train set, for example, but then doesn't want to play with it. He's a builder, he's a maker in his mindset. So he's very overly interested in my tools and my toys from a production capacity, interestingly enough. He wants to paint them more, that kind of mindset. And I don't know if that means that he'll go off and have a very vocational profession somewhere else, but his form of play is very problem solving. I think that's part of his personality. So in terms of toys, he does have stuff that I've made for him. It's so normal for him, though, that Mum makes toys. So I think it's almost second nature that Mum makes toys, and that's kind of what she does. And I think sometimes he's had much more of a favourable reaction when other people have made him toys. Because we have obviously got other toy makers in our networks who have made toys for my little boy, and they've been more gratefully received than what Mum makes. I think it's just more special than what Mum produces. But yeah, he has a lot of nice toys, a lot of traditional toys, and he actually though sometimes is quite happy with it. Just being outdoors, watching what's going on rather than necessarily playing with them. Does that make sense? It's just his personality. It's his personality, and that's what I think I'm coming back to in a way. It's like, allowing children to sort of embrace what it is that's underneath with themselves, that rather than giving them something that sort of says it has to be done this way, you give them the things that sort of enable them to almost get that reflection through practice of who they actually are and what they're interested in doing. He has very non-gendered toys as well.
Oh, really?
It's quite fascinating. Yeah, we've got lots of dolls and things like that. And he is, he's not really cottoned on to the idea of gender binaries at all, actually. I think it's that thing about at home, because it doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. Does that make sense?
No, definitely. It's a topic that I've sort of come up recently with. This is a bit of a tangent, so prepare yourself. There was several cases of fires in America. I don't know if you saw, and one of the most, I guess, extensive ones was caused by this sort of gender reveal pyrotechnic fireworks display, essentially. And
I didn't know that.
And it destroyed acres and acres of land. And
really?
Yeah, and it was something that I sort of thought to myself, I've obviously seen videos of people going out and beyond for these parties, but I thought to myself, the damage that it's done, really, for a title or a binary pressure that you're putting on your child before they're even born and that will impact very early on, and this is something obviously that you're involved with, the toys and the environment that they're surrounded by, the things they're going to learn and be introduced to in the world, and their experiences are going to be from a binary system that has expectations on these very young and fragile minds. And it goes back to that creativity thing, that it's a lot more fluid and diverse than I think people realize. And so by doing these gender reveal parties, and you think about current times, are they outdated? Are they not Victorian in a way, that it's not really taking into account what the current movements are and what the current feelings are, and ultimately these parties are about sort of, yes, or will it be a boy or will it be a girl? And I kind of think in the back of my head, well, should it matter either way? You'll love that child no matter what, right? And you'd want that child to be happy no matter what, no matter if they like dolls or trucks, if they like pink or blue or yellow or red, or, you know what I mean? It's just so many expectations, and I don't know if that's something that you were passionate about when you had your boy, or if that's something that's been a quite big drive for you even in your work as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I come from an academic background, I think, all that kind of stuff is just totally not on my radar anyway. I don't know how to explain it, but it was almost like I didn't embrace that kind of stuff anyway. So, like, when I was pregnant, I wasn't really thinking, oh, should we have a gender reveal party and is it a girl or a boy? Like, it was just more like, let's just hope he's nice and healthy. Do you know what I mean? Because we didn't know what we was having, but it was more like, let's just hope we have a healthy baby at one point. And I think, and I do think that speaks about like where you're coming from culturally, doesn't it? And when you've done a couple of master's degree and a PhD, no one really talks like that, and you're kind of in a different cultural sphere with that. And I think it's the same now actually, in that a lot of the networks that I have around me are sort of very much the same. You know, it's quite like the normal is not to be very gendered. And the normal is to be very diverse. So you end up sinking into that culture. But I appreciate that that's not everybody's culture, is it? And there's different ways of doing it, you know what I mean? But yeah, I never did that. It never even occurred to me. But I do see it sometimes, like you're saying, and I kind of try not to hold judgment on it in a way. But I do think we have to sort of at the same time acknowledge that there is an impact from that. I think I put a tweet out this morning actually talking about how the language around babies, even at days old, is different. So like girls are beautiful and boys are strong, and I'm talking about that as days old. Do you know what I mean? And I think what you're saying there resonates more for me. It's almost less about the gender and more about the constraints that it places upon people. It's what those gendered identities sort of impose upon people.
Which carry on, they started very early on and then they carry on throughout their lives, and you sort of think, aren't you just limiting your child, the generation that you're going to leave behind? Would you rather not give them every option?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just all about embracing diversity. I mean, I think the same thing about education. It's like, if we only focus on maths and English, what are we missing? Like, who's missing in that conversation? And what is it that they can bring to the table? And it's the same thing about if we just pretend that the only thing that really matters is this gender binary, who's missing? Who's missing from that conversation? And I think that's the important part of trying to get to that point about what is valued there and what isn't, and why are we not valuing the difference? I think embracing diversity is really where it lies to me. Because if we can open up a space where people can be different and diverse, I think lots of different things come to the table.
What's the next steps for you then, Selina? Obviously, working hard as usual, multitasking, painting even now, but I just wanted to kind of get to know what your plans are. Like you were saying, you're heading towards Christmas and it must be a very busy time for you. So I just wanted to get a sort of snapshot, if you like, of what it's going to look like for you in this upcoming future, if you like.
Yeah, well, I'm still relatively new business. Like, I've not been doing this for like 15, 20 years or something like that. I think this is like my third year. But the first year that I did it, I was doing it with a very small baby, so it was difficult to sort of put the time into it that I've managed to do now. When I look at like where we're at, really, is like a business. We are growing, so I'm hoping that continues, that we continue to have, you know, a strong customer base, that we continue to produce great stuff, and that we continue that growth pattern. I'm actually going to potentially, fingers crossed, be moving into a craft barn in the new year. The business has grown enough that I'm kind of running out of space. I don't make huge batches, but I could do with making some slightly larger ones because we've been picked up by retail. And we've got some nice retailers now that are also stocking our stuff, which people love because they can get hold of our things a bit quicker. So we've done some retail, and I'm hoping that in January it sort of spells a new phase for us in a new place, one that is just as positive as what we've got here, but also offers new opportunities that we've not been able to do. If you are constrained by where you work, it's a very interesting dynamic as a creative person. Your environment affects how you work. So it'd be interesting to see what actually happens by doing a move. But on broader sense than that, I'd like to do some more toy designs, but I think the move is probably the first big milestone to sort of embrace before I do anything different. I think with a little bit more room, I'd like to make some more cool things, some more rainbowy cool things if possible. I've been asked to make some toys for younger ages, like babies and, you know, like teethers and things like that. And there's been talks before about producing some bigger toys again, like activity things. I'm not saying I'm going to do any of these things, but it's just nice to speculate on having some more space to think about producing some more design work. So I think that's what motivates me, really. It's a creative process. It's the making and the sort of the thinking up the new ideas, really. Let's hope that next year, though, is a better COVID year for everybody, right? So that we can probably all have a slightly easier time of it on that space, because it has had a toll. I think it does, so doesn't it? Because it's unpredictability of not knowing what's happening week by week at the moment. It makes it difficult. An example of that would be, you're going to find that business premises are closing, that your suppliers are unable to keep working because of restrictions, or, it's that kind of stuff that makes it really difficult to prepare yourself really the best you can, but makes it really difficult to know what's going to go on a day-to-day. So I'm hoping that next year's a lot more stable, because this year it's been a lot more like moment by moment. I don't know what's going to happen, but you must have a sense of that, right? It's just so fast-paced what's going on in terms of rules changes and local lockdowns. So we've experienced some local lockdowns nearby. I think that's presented some interesting challenges. I think that's where we're at, yeah.